Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
We are on episode 2 of our space series. And this week we are looking at the moon and what will we find up there.
Yeah, we're back up on the moon today.
Yeah, it's moon heavy at the start of the series, but we're starting close in space. And then we're going to move further out, right? That's the structure of the series.
We'll get a bit further out as each episode will be going a little bit further away, further afield.
Don't hold us to that. And this week our 2 films this week are Frau im Mond, or Woman on the Moon. Is it Woman on the Moon or Women on the Moon?
I think it's Woman in the Moon.
Woman in the Moon. Weird. Frau im Mond, directed by Fritz Lang. That came out in 1929. And then we've got Moon, by Duncan Jones from 2009. Zowie Bowie.
Yeah, so we're keeping the moon theme strong in this episode.
Yeah, heavily moon based. We're on the moon bases.
Yeah, and like in this episode as well, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be posing the question, what will we find up there? Why are we going to space? What are we looking for?
Yeah, so and what's the moon like?
Yeah, exactly. What's it like up there? What are we going to find? What's it going to tell us about ourselves? All of that kind of stuff we're going to delve into in today's episode.
Yeah. So let's talk about Woman in the Moon. Are we going to call it Frau im Mond or Woman in the Moon?
I've been calling it Frau im Mond because I feel like we've got a lot of moon titles in the films we're looking at for the first few episodes.
And we're both weirdly more confident on our pronunciation of German.
Yeah,
than any other language. So yeah, Frau im Mond. It's another Fritz Lang film, and obviously we looked at Metropolis for AI in our last series. There's a lot of similarities, isn't there, between those 2 films? It really reminded me of Metropolis in a lot of ways, but also veering off in very different ways.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Because this was 3 years after he'd made Metropolis, wasn't it? This one came out.
They're both absolute monsters, aren't they?
Yeah, because how long's the running time on this one? It was about 2.5 hours?
More than that, nearly 3 hours.
Jeez.
Yeah. There are versions on YouTube that were over 4 hours, but I think they're jumbled up cuts. I don't think they're official versions.
I don't think it needs to be more than 4 hours.
No.
Yeah.
No, there's other cuts as well. There's like a US cut that's 90 minutes. I'd be interested to see that. I'll confess I watched some of this on double speed.
Well, this is the thing,
motion.
because it's such a monster of a film.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it. It doesn't really get going until an hour and a half in.
Yeah. But
in terms of the space stuff.
Yeah, but the second half is amazing.
Yeah, it's full throttle.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So the whole first half is all build up to their journey to the moon, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's sort of subterfuge and, spies and mysterious organizations and love triangles and all of this.
It's all sort of like a social melodrama, isn't it? Spy kind of, the spy feel that you get for the first half.
Yeah, which is quite good. That was quite fun. But I was sort of very much, come on, let's go to the moon. Yeah, there's a sort of a big focus on the love triangle gets set up. So we've got mad scientist character who's got all these ideas about what might be on the moon. Well, not all these ideas, one very specific idea.
Yeah, the idea that he has is brilliant, and it's probably kind of the thing that they would have thought about at that time, because you have no idea what's going to be on the moon.
Yeah.
But what does the professor think is going to be on the moon?
He thinks there's mountains full of gold.
Mountains of gold up there. So that's the reason he wants to go up there, and that's the reason he's got... it has like a flashback sequence very early on as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I really like that. That was cool.
Yeah.
It's a flashback to him as a younger scientist, isn't it?
Yeah, because it sets up at the start. You see him, and he's very poor. He's he's got boxes everywhere. There's like books, but the books are used as furniture and things like that.
Yeah,
and it's like you can tell he's poor. He
hasn't
got
completely
any money.
Broke, and he I think Helios, his young friend, who's kind of the main character of the film, he slipped some money into his pocket last time he was around.
Yeah.
Because he kind of slams it on the desk and he's like, because Helios asks him if he's got any food to share, and he slaps some money down on the desk and says, "You go and buy your own food. I found this," you know. So he's a bit proud. And
yeah. And they have like a lovely meal of bread and wine, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nutritious.
Well, we're kind of in the Great Depression, aren't we? 1929. So we have that flashback where he's lecturing in a big scientific sort of lecture hall to a room full of old men who all look identical.
Yeah. Which made me think of A Trip to the Moon. The previous film with the astronomers all there in the sort of like looking at the chalkboard.
The group of old learned men.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they laugh him out of town, don't they?
Yeah, because it's the reverse of what happened in A Trip to the Moon, whereas someone's laughed out for saying, we shouldn't go to the moon. Whereas the professor in this, he's laughed at because he wants to go to the moon to find gold.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is quite hilarious looking at it from today's perspective.
Well, his hypothesis gets expanded a little bit later in the film, because they're actually saying that they reckon that because we've never seen the dark side of the moon, there must be atmosphere there, and with atmosphere there'll be water, and with water there'll be life.
Yeah, I love that whole concept that there's like a whole other side that you just have no idea what's going to be there if you get to that side of the moon.
And on top of that, so we're introducing Helios as this old mad scientist's like young sidekick friend.
It's like his protege.
Yeah. And he's kind of the only person who takes his ideas seriously, and he wants to go to the moon, and he's trying to make it happen. But what else is going on in Helios's life?
So Helios is also in a bit of a love triangle, isn't he? So he's found out that his best friend, Windiger or Hans?
Vindiger. Hans Vindiger. Yeah.
So he's found out that Hans is engaged to Frida.
Yeah.
Who is another one of the people that he's been working with. And you can tell there's something going on there.
He's in love with Frida as well.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. And so he says that Hans isn't going to be able to go to the moon with him because he's about to get engaged. So he won't be traveling to the moon. And the professor's sort of like quizzing him about this as to what the reasons are. So that's how like this melodrama begins in the first half of the film.
Yeah.
You've got this sort of like, you've got Helios pining over Frida, and sort of Hans in the background as well.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the professor's also besieged by sort of menacing people who are coming to his flat and bullying him and trying to get his manuscript. And then Helios starts to be pursued by the same shadowy group.
Yeah, because the manuscript becomes really important, doesn't it? Because this is how they're going to get to the moon in the first place.
Yeah.
It's got all the sort of like what they're going to find, how they're going to get there, the diagrams of the specific shuttle they're going to make. And this gets stolen by these shady characters. There's one scene as well, which I really enjoyed. There's literally someone with a hand coming through the window trying to pick up the manuscript. And it's like something out of like a horror film, isn't it?
Yeah, or a cartoon.
Yeah, or like a sort of like a Looney Tunes kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like creeping through the window trying to get it.
There's lots of nice little Fritz Lang-y things like that, where because he's not really considered an expressionist filmmaker, is he? He's not in that group.
I wouldn't
Germans.
say so, no.
But he does do these fun little things like that, and fun stuff with shadows, and or the kind of animated stuff where words are kind of popping out the screen, which is a bit more stylized and slightly closer to that expressionism that was going on at the same time.
So there's this shady organisation trying to get this manuscript.
Yeah, a group of just rich people.
They're just businessmen, aren't they?
Yeah, and one woman who smokes a big cigar, and they all call each other gentlemen, but there's a lady in that group. It was very progressive, I thought, for a 1929 film anyway.
So basically what happens is the manuscript gets stolen, doesn't it, by this shady group of businessmen who are trying to sort of steal the plans to get to the moon so they can get the gold themselves.
Yeah, and their man on the ground is this Mr. Turner guy, who is credited as the man who calls himself Mr. Turner, or the man who calls himself Walter Turner. Yeah,
because he's kind of a man of the skies, isn't he?
Yeah, he does a weird thing where he like ruffles his hair up. I Was that a reference to something we'd already seen, or?
Well, I don't know, because he appeared as a different character earlier on. So he appears at Helis's house and talks to the housekeeper
Oh, right, yeah.
about a meeting he's supposed to have with him. And then you find out later that it's the same guy.
Yeah.
Because he does this weird thing with his hair and
Yeah.
he puts his glasses on. And I really enjoyed that bit because...
It's a very good special effect,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
because when you see Turner at the door, he looks like really shady and his hair is very... It's very Nazi-like, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's like swept to the side. It's all sort of like greased off. And it's he looks dodgy. And then when he does that sort of like, he scruffs up his hair and then he puts his glasses on and then he's this other character who, when I was watching it, I didn't have any idea that it was the same guy.
Same actor, right?
Yeah. But it must have been. And obviously it's just a nice sort of little technique he's used there.
Yeah. It looked cool. There's loads of cool special effects in this film.
Yeah.
So the group, the shadowy organization of businessmen, steals the manuscript, and they get leverage over Helios, don't they? They say, you can still do your trip to the moon, but you're working for us now, basically. They strong arm him.
Yeah, and that's when the sort of like the main bit of the story sort of kicks in, that they are going to make this trip to the moon, but in order to do it, they're going to have to work underneath these businessmen, these sort of like these rich upper class people.
Yeah, because they've come to accept, as I think the scientific community in the film has come to accept, that they've come to accept that Manfeld was right and there is gold in them. There are hills.
Yeah.
And they want it. They're the shadowy business elite, Illuminati, whatever, and they want all this control of any big supply of gold coming into the economy. It's coming into our pockets.
Yeah, because they say a really interesting line during that sort of, they have a business meeting basically when they're looking over the manuscript and diagrams and all the sort of research that Manfeld and Helios have got together. And they say a line. What was the line? So they say, riches are for businessmen, not visionaries or idealists.
Yeah.
Something along those
It should
lines.
be placed in the hands of businessmen. Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Not idealists.
It's a full-on thing to say, isn't it? They're saying it should be with businessmen. You can't have these dreamers with all the money. It needs to be controlled by us. We need to be the ones dishing it out.
Yeah, it's quite a strong anti-capitalist ideology from Fritz Lang. Again, which, we talked about in Metropolis. That was quite an on-the-nose satire of capitalism, the pyramid, and all of that.
And it's interesting, again, in this film, you've got Fritz Lang with the haves and have-nots kind of situation. So he's put that in here again. And obviously, that's part of the reason that sort of... Yeah, because you were talking about the depression earlier. It must have been a depression because Hitler rose to power in the midst of all of that, didn't he?
Yeah, I feel like the beer hall putsch would have been happening at the same time as this, or maybe a couple of years before. So right in the middle of Hitler's rise to power.
Yeah, so you've got this sort of like haves, have-nots situation.
Yeah.
And Fritz Lang is really putting that to the forefront.
Which is interesting because that's something that Hitler kind of rose to power on the back of, wasn't it? He was a populist. The National Socialism had that supposed element of socialism that was, he was supposedly being a voice for the people.
Yeah.
And, his ideology framed the bad guys there. And he saw a have and have not, and that's how he used that as well. And it's interesting that Fritz Lang seems like a pretty left-wing guy, but he's challenging that kind of that approach to that ideology, which is that there are haves and have-nots, but it's not in the way that this Herr Hitler character is trying to make you think it is.
Yeah, and it's important that he's saying that as well in this sort of like this time period. Yeah,
it's a pretty ballsy thing to do as a German filmmaker.
So I really loved this whole scene with the sort of board meeting of the rich businessman. Yeah,
we go into like a cool animated diagram of the trip to the moon.
Yeah, and it's like again, I was thinking back to A Trip to the Moon, the Méliès film, and how when we talked about the diagram for that, it was just a chalkboard saying, "There's the moon, there's us, we're going there." This time you've got in-depth diagrams with gravitational fields and things like that. And they talk about the trajectory that they need and how fast they need to go in
the
order
velocity to break out of orbit.
Yeah, all these important sort of like scientific problems that they have to come up against.
It was convincingly scientific, wasn't it?
Yeah, but they did have bits of sort of a bit sort of fantastical as well.
Like
Because there was one thing
what
that
stuck
they
out for
said.
you?
So they mentioned something about insects. What did they say?
Yeah, they Helios's first. So Helios has already launched a rocket to prove that it's possible, and he had a clockwork automated camera
Yeah,
to take footage.
I thought that was a great idea as well, because how else is it going to know when to go off?
They didn't explain how the footage came back to Earth.
Yeah, I was a little bit confused by like
because the rocket exploded.
Magically came back. That's fine.
I liked the kind of, they show the innards of that rocket, and it's very like it's like the kind of video that you put together for like shareholders if you were a space company. It's like, here's the rocket, here's our clockwork camera, it's going to send footage back to us. But yeah, the footage that got sent back, someone in an observatory in Jamaica, I think, had observed it and said that there were loads of insects under the surface.
Craters filled with swarms of insects were there.
Well, I don't think that's fantastical, though. I think that's just speculating scientifically without having all the correct scientific knowledge.
I think in my head I was thinking more of the sort of 50s sci-fi element. And I was imagining craters full of alien creatures and insects and stuff.
Well, that's sort of what they're hinting at, but I think he's trying to do it a bit more with a serious face, which is
definitely.
We think there is possibly an atmosphere on the moon, and if there's an atmosphere, we think there's possibly life on the moon, and I think that's what they were going for with the insect stuff.
Yeah, and they said there's probably going to be vegetation and water and all these things that means you could survive on there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting that they've got all these concepts at this point, and the way that Fritz Lang is sort of talking about them is it's kind of like it's a trend which we see progress as science fiction films develop. So you've always got a board meeting when they discuss the science, and this must have been one of the first times in a film where they've actually put that there, so you're seeing it, and then it becomes like a trend. That's kind of how they explain all the science bits.
Yeah, he's really obsessing over the science of it, isn't he?
Yeah,
and that's kind of the core of this whole film, isn't it? That's what I think separates it from Metropolis, which is very fantastical and stylized and set in this, distant future or alternate world. Whereas Frau in Mond, he's really trying to do like, this is what it would be like if we were to try and build a rocket to go to the moon.
Yeah, definitely. And he like, in the same way that Stanley Kubrick got in scientists to consult about various space technology on 2001, Fritz Lang was doing it here as well. So he got an actual rocket scientist, Hermann Oberth, to help create a flying model of the actual rocket that they'd use in the film. And they were going to create like a proper one, but I think there was down to budgets or something like that. But they were going to do one as a publicity stunt.
What, like life size?
Yeah, so they were going to do, I think it was on the day of release of the film, they were going to launch one from northern Germany or something like that.
Wow.
But then Oberth pulled out of the deal because the rocket wasn't working or something. So obviously as a rocket scientist, you don't want to have a rocket on a big publicity day fail.
Yeah.
But one of the other interesting things about this guy is one of his proteges was a guy called Werner von Braun. Have you ever heard of von Braun? So he was a really big sort of like one of the biggest sort of rocket scientists there were. And he sort of worked for the Nazis at one point, but then the Americans took him afterwards, after the war had ended and all that kind of stuff. So he moved to America, and then he worked on rockets over there for NASA.
Wow.
So he's like one of the forefathers of proper space
Actual
technology.
space travel. Yeah.
So to have so the connections this film has to actually how they built that technology is really fascinating. Because when it comes to the actual launch sequence, it's so accurate as to how things are now.
Yeah, it's amazing. The rocket that they go up in is kind of trundled in on a moving platform. It's in a hangar, and then there's tracks, and it's all done with model work. It looks great. They wheel it out very slowly. There's crowds. They're all cheering for it. It
Massive
looks like
bay doors.
Yeah, it's so similar to stuff that you see if you look at footage from the 60s, 70s of space shuttle launches with crowds gathering and slowly moving platforms, positioning a rocket into place. And that's interesting what you're saying about he actually spoke to the rocket scientists, because we talked about how Georges Méliès would have just been speculating on, what's logical about getting to the moon. It would be like shooting a big gun into space. And presumably in 1903 or whatever, that was just speculation. I don't know. But it's interesting that Fritz Lang's actually got someone in who works in this field, who's doing the same logical thinking, but they do it for a living and they've got a lot more thinking about it.
That's it.
So they're saying, it is like a big gun, but this is what we expect the big gun to look like. It's kind of a tall thing, and it will have to be winched in on a platform, and the suspending it in water is really interesting. Like, it's such an interesting detail, and it's like really good world building for the film, like to just have that little detail in there.
But that's a thing that they actually do, don't they? They put the rockets in water so it helps it absorbs the sound.
Yeah, I think, do they put it in, or do they just put water underneath? I think
it's underneath it, but it's still sort of like, it's that concept.
It's an interesting parallel.
Why would you be like, we're going to have water underneath this rocket which we made, this imaginary rocket?
Yeah. So the way they explain it in the film is that they've made it so light, because they need to blast it in space, that it literally can't stand upright on its own for the launch. So they float it in water, basically, don't they?
Yeah.
What a great little detail. Like that, obviously this rocket scientist that he worked with had thought through the sort of logistics of building a rocket big enough to blast into space and how heavy it would have to be and stuff like that. And he knew that.
It's crazy, isn't it? And like all the little nuances that they've got there as well. Like you said about the crowds, they've got a sort of a commentator. Somebody's talking over what's going on, and they've got like loads of mics. There's reporters. The crowds are so excited that they run underneath the spaceship, don't they?
Yeah, they're trying to rush the spaceship like it's a Beatles concert.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, so the launch goes successfully. The launch sequence is great. Yeah. There's this whole speech about we're going to be in a battle with pressure, and if we survive the battle with pressure, then we can make it to the moon, and it's really tense. I love that scene. That's where I think when the rocket is starting to be winched out and we're getting all of that kind of prep for the launch, that for me was where the film really like kicked up a gear and like got really
the music's
fun.
So epic as well. It's like fanfares, isn't it?
It is really good. Did you watch it on Daily Motion?
Yeah.
So I think we watched the same version. I did watch a little bit of other versions, and it's totally different music. So I thought the music sounded a little bit more modern than the film is.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that one.
So I don't know if that's original scoring or not, but it was good music.
Yeah, it worked. It definitely provided the right effect for that kind of scene. Then it goes to the actual launch sequence, and they've got the first ever countdown. Now, this was not a thing beforehand. There was, so it goes 60 seconds, then it goes 20 seconds, then it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And when you think of that, you think of a liftoff.
Yeah.
And that's because of this film.
Really?
Yeah, this is what started that off.
What, Fritz Lang just came up with that?
Yeah, Fritz Lang came. It was like a filmic device to build up the tension for the liftoff.
Right.
And then that's become the thing to do when a rocket goes off.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a legacy.
It's absolutely mad though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And because the whole reason he's obviously come up with it is to build that tension. But then it's become a practical thing as to sort of to signify a launch.
Yeah. How practical is it? I guess,
Yeah, it might be sort of like
when you do have
ceremonial.
Yeah, a little bit of that, I would think. Like when you do have a space shuttle being launched, why can't that just be a press the button and it goes? Like on the intercom, right, you guys ready? We're going to press the thing. Everyone happy? All right.
Everyone good? Yeah, okay, cool.
All right, chill out. I'm going to do it. goodbye. Why not? I think there is some stuff that within the modern countdown, things happen at 5 and pre-launch at
So, you
3.
press this button, you do that.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it could all just be done beep, 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 right?
Maybe. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I still
big speculation from me, isn't it? Speculating on how a space shuttle launch works.
We'll have to chat to someone at some point who knows what they're talking about.
I'll tell them how to do their job. I'm coming off well there, aren't I? All right.
But yes, they do the countdown, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then they're off and they're away.
Yeah.
And again, the science of it is really interesting because they say that they have to get rid of certain parts of the rocket, don't they? So Hans is supposed to pull a lever at a certain point to get one of the rocket parts to release so they can carry on their trajectory.
Yeah.
And they talk about the fear of this as well. Like if they get the trajectory wrong or if they go past the speed,
they'll just be sailing off into space forever.
Yeah. And it's that first idea of being lost in space and that as a sort of a proposition, like something that could happen.
Yeah.
And that terrifies them.
Specifically, it's really terrifying Vindiger, who is like, he's the one who's like, we could be launched in space. And he looks a bit wild-eyed. And Helios has to be the one that's like, well, I'll pull the lever. I'll hit the brakes. Don't worry.
Don't worry. We'll get it sorted out.
Do you think that's the point when Vindiger is kind of starting to lose it a little bit? Because for the rest of the film, Vindiger's going crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And he becomes a bit of a danger to the mission.
Yeah, because at that point he says, right, we need to leave. We can't do this. Like, it's not safe. And doesn't he say something like, he tries to get Frida out. There's something like that just before the launch.
Yeah.
And they say, no, you can't do this because where all of the eyes and ears of the world are on us now, if you leave, then it will reflect badly on everyone.
Yeah.
So you have to stay.
Yeah. Well, she kind of says that. She's like, she really stands up for herself. She's like, please don't shame me as a woman.
Yeah.
You know, the eyes of the world are on us. Please don't make me go out there. And yeah, that was a good moment for her.
Yeah.
To just be like, I'm not opening that door, climbing down that ladder, looking like an idiot. You know. And
she's quite a ballsy character as well, isn't she? Because
she's pretty good.
She's the one who wanted to go to the moon. There was a scene prior to this where her and Helios are sort of like having a quite intense moment, and he's like grabbing her and stuff, and you could tell how he feels towards her.
Yeah.
But she's very much like, I want to go to the moon as well. I don't want to be the one left behind. And that sort of like gets carried on throughout the film.
Yeah, yeah. She's obviously returning the feelings, at least to an extent, to Helios.
Yeah.
It's not just one way.
There's something going on there from the start.
Yeah. So the launch is successful. We got a cool scene where they're all like in their bunks, like freaking out from the G-forces, but they survive that. And then we go into a really good weightlessness scene.
Yeah, because this was done really well as well, because when you see the inside of the spaceship before they launch, you see all these straps everywhere.
Yeah.
The straps hanging from the ceiling. And it made me instantly think of like when you're on the overground.
Yeah.
And you've got the things to hang on from.
Yeah, there's like a dozen of them just on the ceiling before we've even talked about the weightlessness.
So I was like, oh, that must be for what it's for. And then as they go up, you notice they're all on the floor as well.
Yeah, there's foot straps.
Yeah. To sort of combat the weightlessness.
Yeah. But then he does some very good camera trickery to actually do. So they'll be walking around by gently placing their feet in these foot straps. And then we see actual weightlessness because... Oh, we haven't talked about the little stowaway boy.
The little stowaway boy, but
I have
also
no idea what was going on with that.
So there's a mouse as well.
Yeah.
So there's quite an eclectic group of people on this spaceship. So you've got, so there's Hans, Helios, Frida, Professor Manfelt, and then there's Turner.
Turner, yeah.
And the mouse called Josephine.
Okay.
Who the professor names at some point during this. So this is the same mouse that you see at the beginning, who he's feeding, who's just suddenly become a big part of his life.
Yeah.
And then you've got the stowaway, so this boy. So,
yeah, what's the deal with the boy?
So there was a bit prior to this, again, earlier in the film. You know, there's that bit where the manuscript gets stolen.
Yeah.
and there's a little boy reading a sort of comic.
Sure.
And he's the one who is like lives next door to Helios.
Okay.
And he's always following him around. There's a bit when he goes in and he's like, oh, what's going on, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I think I sort of missed that. I remember seeing him reading his little comic book.
Yeah, and then he stows away on the spaceship, in a spacesuit. How the hell did he deal with the pressure if he's just hidden in a spacesuit?
Well, he had a bad time, didn't he? But then they give him a little nip of brandy.
And he's all right. I love that as well, the brandy.
Yeah.
As soon as they sort of like feel okay about the space travel, they're like, let's bust out the brandy, shall we? Let's all have a little drink. But the bunks as well, they've got like proper bunks when they're going through the pressure, and that again, that's kind of like how they do in real life space travel. They've got to be sort of suspended.
They're horizontal, so I think in a shuttle, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're in seats, but they're flipped on their backs, so the seat is facing up, so their back is, horizontal with the ground.
Yes, they can deal with that pressure.
Yeah.
So again, this speaks to the scientific elements of it.
Yeah, it's good.
And there was the floating cage with the mouse.
There's a floating cage. The little boy floats up a ladder, and then he kind of gets stuck in the air.
It's like, no, get me down.
And Helios has to... When he goes up the ladder, it's very obviously just some simple wire work. But then when he's just like suspended in the air and Helios kind of like pulls him towards him by the leg, I wasn't immediately aware of how it was done. It was a really good bit of special effects.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if there was any weightlessness in space in media at this point.
Yeah, because it's the only time you've seen it, really. Yeah.
So they get to the moon, and they kind of crash land. It's quite intense. We've got a nice little interlude with the weightlessness, and there's like a ship's log. Vindiger's kind of going crazy and wants to turn back, and he's just going a bit weird.
Yeah.
But they get to the moon, and there's a crash landing, and then the rest of the film plays out on the moon. What did you think of the moon when we finally get there and see it?
It was interesting because again, going back to the boardroom scene, the pictures of the moon they show look like pictures of the moon that we've seen now, and they're quite commonplace. And then when they get there, they have the big dust cloud which pops up, so it's all quite as you would imagine.
Yeah,
and it's like a little. Like it's like a pod, isn't it? The way it lands.
It's landing sort of top of the capsule up.
Yeah,
I think
so. Like you would the actual space probes did land on the moon, like during Apollo 11 and that kind of stuff. But the actual moon itself, when the professor goes out to find out if it's got an atmosphere, I really enjoyed that bit.
What, the spacesuit that he puts on? Yeah,
the diving suit.
Yeah, he puts on a big diving bell.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks great.
And he's like, right, I'm going to go out. And he's like, everyone's like, no, we need to check first. No. Yeah. But he's like, no, I need to go. I'm going to get my gold now.
Yeah.
He's running out. He puts on a big diving suit, goes out, and then to test if there's any atmosphere, he lights a match, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And I thought that was like a nice little touch.
Again, really, yeah, just like very smart.
How would you do it? See.
Yeah.
And then he takes his helmet off, and then afterwards, when the rest of them realise there's atmosphere, it's the best thing because they come out in their little cardigans.
Yeah, on the moon.
Yeah.
So this is, we're easily 2 hours into the film at this point, and there's been so much like good, convincing, believable science, and the whole film is such a big swing scientifically, and this is the first miss.
Yeah.
Because they just didn't know in 1929 that there's definitely no atmosphere.
Exactly. And you've set that premise at the start that the dark side of the moon might have.
Yeah. And they follow through with it. So then our characters are just happily running around on the moon with no spacesuits or anything.
But it's like they could have just been going around in diving suits, and that could have been an option. But I suppose as a film, you want to see your characters acting properly.
I didn't mind it. Yeah, I didn't mind it at all because it, as a contrast to Journey to the Moon, this film just takes it all very seriously all the way through. They get it wrong with what it is like on the moon because it's 40 odd years before anyone went to the moon, but it takes it all seriously. The striking of the match to test the atmosphere, it's a serious sort of way of representing if it's safe or not. And he was taking precautions if it wasn't safe. He was wearing a suit. So I just like all of that about it. The fact that it's quite, it's just serious about trying to depict a journey to the moon.
But then when he tries to find water, it's serious, but it's quite amusing at the same time.
It's a bit wacky because he's using a divining rod.
Yeah. Because at first I was like, he's just looking for the gold. Why is he trying to find the water? But then I suppose he thinks the water's going to be near the gold, maybe.
I think, it loses its way a little bit here, but he's sort of he's trying to prove different aspects of his theories, I guess, because he did suggest that there would be water on the moon. The thing about the divining rods, right? I don't really know a lot about that, but they're bullshit, right? That's not a real thing, right?
I'm pretty sure they're bullshit.
Yeah, that's just sort of...
I remember pretending like I had a divining rod as a kid with like a stick or something.
But I think that's all a divining rod is a stick that you pretend or imagine
imagine it's
or
going
believe
down.
Points to water.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any sort of, if they're real or not.
Yeah, I don't think they are. But I don't know. Did people not know that in 1929? Or am I wrong? Do they work?
Well, I mean, the professor's getting more and more mad as well, though, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, he's quite wild at this point.
Yeah, because he's so excited about being on the moon now.
He loves
finally.
the moon, yeah.
He's just going a bit crazy. He's like, he runs off, he goes out, he doesn't care what anybody else is doing. He's just like, right, I'm doing my own thing now, I'm here. And his hair goes a bit more wild.
Yeah, he looks like shit. But he does find gold, doesn't he?
Yeah.
For all of that, he's stomping through he finds water, but it's like gross, boggy.
Bubbling, sort of like muddy, molten
but
water.
He marches through that and he finds his gold and he's like hugging and kissing the gold in the rocks.
He's really excited. And then there's like the big title which says gold.
Gold. Because he's shouting from where he is, like, gold, gold, gold. And you see the words popping out of the screen. And then he's pursued by Turner, who is also seeing those words popping out.
Yeah.
And
he's like, right,
him.
I'm going to get some of this as well.
And does he murder the scientist?
Well, he chases after him, and then the scientist doesn't want him to get the gold, so he ends up falling off of a cliff.
He falls, okay. Right, I wasn't really sure what happened.
Yeah, because it does go quite quickly from this point. You spent so long building up to this point, and then it's like, bang, it's all going off. So yes, the professor dies, and then the rest of the guys go after to find out if he's okay. Helios and the boy go off.
Yep.
And doesn't the boy go and get Helios because he's got a sandwich for him or something?
Yeah, it's something weird like that. It's something weird like that. And then for no real reason, Turner tries to kill Vendiger. Is that right? Is that what happens?
Yeah, well, Turner's trying to hijack the spaceship.
Yeah, but why?
Yeah, it's a bit...
Because he's already found the gold.
He's got the gold.
Yeah.
He's going to take it straight there. Probably can get more gold if he's got less people.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he's really thinking straight at that point.
No, and then there's a scuffle. Turner gets shot, but Hans accidentally shoots the oxygen tanks. Turner dies, and then there's a whole... That's basically the climax of the film, isn't it? And then we've got we've got to make a difficult choice situation to wind up the plot.
So one of the tanks has been hit, so they realise that they can't get back to Earth with the amount of fuel they've got left.
So again, just why couldn't they, like, if there's breathable atmosphere on the moon, why couldn't they take some more oxygen with them? I don't know. Tanks can't be filled up.
Who knows what the rocket fuel is?
Yeah. Fine. They didn't know any better. So they kind of draw straws, and Hans loses, and Hans is supposed to live on the moon till they can come back and rescue them.
Which he is not happy about.
No, because he's completely lost his mind by now.
And like when they're doing that whole sequence as well, the boy is doing a tally.
Yeah.
And he's like really happy every time that Hans gets the short straw.
Yeah, brutal. Absolutely brutal. And unnecessary. There's only 3 rounds that they could remember. They don't need a tally.
Exactly.
But he's crossing off whenever Hans is losing.
Yeah.
But in the end, Helios bravely, nobly sacrificed himself.
Because he's our protagonist. He's the one we're rooting for.
Calm, stoic hero throughout the whole thing. And he drugs the others and tells the boy to man the ship, and he's going to stay behind. And then...
it's all very moving, isn't it?
It's very moving. Actually, there's a great shot. The rocket launches and you just see Helios standing there, and he just watches it go, and then there's like a moment of realization of like he's all alone on the moon.
Yeah.
And he just puts his head in his hands, and it's really like, whoa.
Yeah, because you are just there, and he's got is a little tent.
Yeah, and I thought that would have been an unbelievably good ending. But then he turns around and Frida has stayed behind and they embrace. And
Yeah. So she's left her fiance, who's gone too mad for her, and decided to live on the moon with this other guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hence why it's called Woman in the Moon.
Is right? Okay.
I'm
Is
guessing,
that it?
yeah, because
I don't understand the title.
well, she is the woman in the moon. There's a man. There's always a man in the moon,
Yeah.
but now there's a woman in the moon as well,
Yeah.
in their tent, in their little love tent.
I think you could have named this film a lot of other things, like Journey to the Moon.
Could have been.
But fair enough. Yeah, so I really liked it. I think it's a good follow-up for Fritz Lang from
Yeah.
Metropolis. I would even say that some of it's better than Metropolis.
Yeah, I think it's solid, and as a film, you're sort of like. Whereas Metropolis, there's so much other stuff going on in Metropolis. It's a harder watch at points.
Yeah.
Whereas this is very sort of like down the line. It's a strong plot. You know exactly what's going to happen, kind of thing. You know where they're going to go. You know the sort of beats of it.
Yeah, Metropolis is quite operatic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The scale of it is enormous, and there's lots of characters and everything's happening all at once, and it's overly dramatic. This feels like some very tight sci-fi.
Yeah.
Tight early sci-fi. It's very realistic.
It's got that
focus on the
melodrama
sci-fi.
aspect we talked about previously, and it's like, it's a bit more cohesive in some ways.
And in terms of how we're looking at space, it's got a very, I don't know, I think quite an adventurous outlook. It uses a lot of science to try and think through what it would be like to go into space, but there's a very adventurer attitude to the characters, isn't there?
Yeah, because it is like, that's the thing about going to space. It's an adventure. It's a journey. You're going to somewhere different. You don't know what you're going to find. They wanted to find gold so they can bring it back. So it's looking at the moon as a commodity as well.
Yeah.
Some untapped resource.
Yeah, I think the gold is important. It drives several of the characters' motivations, and that's why we're actually going there. And it lets Fritz Lang do some of his anti-capitalist stuff, and it lets that stuff be explored. But really, it's just a means to an end to get us to the moon, an excuse to go on an adventure. It's kind of like a treasure hunt kind of vibe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like those stories would have been around at this time, but.
And it's also like the sci-fi literature that they reference as well, with the boy reading the magazines and sort of what to expect as alien life there. But this is a bit more grounded.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, it's a bit of a joke, isn't it? We're going to show you these are the type of comics you could buy that show you wacky alien life on the moon. That's not the story we're telling. And the characters have a little bit of a laugh that the boy reads a book like that.
Yeah.
Because they are taking it more seriously than that, and they don't expect to find a monster on the moon.
Yeah, because he says that he's like an expert on the moon and on space travel, but really it's just because he's read all these comics. It's like us saying we're experts on science, when really we're just watching lots of sci-fi films.
I know how a space shuttle launch works.
Sam Bell reporting to Central. Everything running smoothly. Over and out. Rock and roll. God bless America.
Good morning, Sam. Do you want me to come your hair then?
Lunar Industries remains the #1 provider of clean energy worldwide due to the hard work of people like you.
Daddy says I know.
3 years is a long haul,
I know you're really lonely up there, but I'm proud of you.
So Frau and Mond was made in 1929, and then 40 years later, you've got Apollo 11. So that's when the first spaceship actually goes to the moon.
Yeah.
Then we go to 2009, and how many years is that?
Another 40 years.
Another 40 years.
Yeah.
And we've got Moon. Another film about the moon, but this has a very different spin on it. Again, it's sort of looking at, what are we going to find on the moon? Why are we going there?
Yeah, but it treats those possibilities as kind of it's more of a backdrop, isn't it?
Yeah.
To the day-to-day life on the moon. So what we might find on the moon is already established in kind of, there's a little video at the start of the film, classic bit of just quick exposition.
Yep.
So what they're mining
He3.
Yeah, helium-3.
Yeah. Which actually is supposed to be a potential fuel source in like if we can get to the moon, it could be something like that. So it's all theoretical.
So it's a clean burning gas, but do people actually think that there's a lot of it on the moon?
I don't know exactly
Right.
what they reckon, but it is sort of a theory. I know that much because Duncan Jones, the director of this, he looked into it quite a bit before making the film. And I think the main idea is it like everything in this film has a purpose. Everything you see, every sort of bit of technology is there for a reason. Much in the same way as when you watch Blade Runner, you knew that everything there was there for a purpose. It does something. So if they've made a bit of tech, it's there for a reason. So I think so I watched a little video about Duncan Jones explaining the HE3 stuff. This film is about an astronaut who's mining the moon.
Yeah.
So they're mining the moon. They're going around in these harvesters. They harvest the moon rock, then they bake it, turn it to gas, and then the gas turns into liquid, and then they ship it back to Earth. So that's the main idea about this HE3 fuel in this film.
Yeah, they're kind of launching it in a small rocket.
Yeah.
Once he's got a full tank or a few full tanks, he pops it in a container, it blasts off to Earth. But all of that is very quickly put together in some background exposition, and then we're just introduced to Sam Bell and his kind of day-to-day life. And the key thing is that it's only a 3-year shift.
Yeah.
And he is right at the end of his 3-year shift, and it's been difficult. He's struggling. He's really struggling with just being completely on his own, and he's very, very ready to go home to his wife and daughter.
Yeah, because this film focuses a lot more on the characters and what it could be like to be on the moon for long periods of time, being away on another planet, what effects that has on people. So the main bits of Frau and Mond were the sort of like the melodrama bits at the beginning. That's the main part of the film. So it's taking all of those character elements and building up the character, but it's doing it in this backdrop from the start. So we're on the moon, but we're dealing with all the character straight away.
Yeah.
So we haven't got any of the setup, which is like we're already right in the thick of it.
And Duncan Jones is kind of using the moon as a place where a character would just be completely on their own. I think this film could have easily happened on, like a Red Dwarf Nostromo type mining ship.
Yeah.
In deep space. The moon itself, I guess, is not terribly important, I don't think, to the plot and the themes. It's just used as a place where it's like shorthand for this character is very, very far away from anybody else. And that could be out in space. It could have been a desert island film. It's just a very quick way of showing us that he is the most alone man that ever was,
And that's essential to the plot and how it develops.
Yeah, because they build that up. We know that he's pining for his wife and his daughter, but his only communication with them is through recorded messages. We've got some problems with our live link with Earth.
There's some sort of solar flare or something they keep saying.
Yeah, so he can record messages for his wife and he can see recorded messages for his wife, but it's another layer of removal. Like, we have the technology to talk live to Earth. You could talk to your wife every day, but it's broken.
Yeah.
So we're just doing recorded messages. And because of some emotional problems maybe in the relationship, not a lot of those messages get sent to him. He's sent like 100 and he's only got like 5 or whatever.
Yeah. And one of the important things as well is that he is almost at the end of his 3-year shift, isn't he?
Yeah.
So you see the impact of that in his surroundings. So the video messages he keeps getting, you see it. He's labeled stuff. He's got like a little smiley face calendar as to how many days he's been there and stuff like that.
Yeah, like a prison.
Yeah, like a prison.
Yeah.
And he's named everything as well.
Yeah, very silent running-y, isn't it?
Yeah.
That kind of like at the end of your rope with your isolation, that you're projecting your emotions onto inanimate objects just for the sake of company.
Yeah, because he names the plants that he looks after. He names each of the harvesters.
Yes, the harvesters were Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, weren't they?
I think so, yeah.
And that's a religious reference
Yes.
that I did get.
Yes.
So normally,
I only got that afterwards.
Okay, they normally go right over my head, but I got that one because it's quite blatant, but
Yeah.
I did get it. And then I didn't get all the names of the plants. One of them was called Ridley, though.
They must have been like in jokes then, I would assume.
So I assumed, the other ones were. I think one of them was Catherine. So I'm not quite sure who that would be.
Because the in joke thing as well is really good, because there's lots of signs early on as to what's really going on. So there's the alarm,
Yeah, his alarm, yeah.
which plays Chesney Hawkes.
I am the one and only.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called, or just the one and only?
One and only, I think
Yeah.
it is. But yeah, everybody knows that song.
Yeah.
And his T-shirt as well says "Wake me up when you're quitting" or something like that.
Oh, wake me up when it's quitting time.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
As in I get it.
yeah.
I didn't get that.
And then that's the T-shirt that
That's with them. Well, we can talk about that because I think more of our audience would have seen Moon than Frau in Mond.
Yeah.
The crux of the plot is that he's actually a clone. He's not at the end. He is at the end of a 3-year shift, but he is not the first Sam Bell to work a 3-year shift on the
Yeah.
moon,
And
and he won't be the last.
the reveal of that is so well done as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen this film since it came out, which is over 10 years ago now, which is crazy. But I remembered it very differently in my head. I remembered the basics of the kind of like feel of the film and the basics of the plot, but I definitely thought it was more of a twist. I thought it was like a third act or ending twist that he's a clone.
Yeah.
So they're cloning Sam Bells, and when the 3-year shift ends, they just wake up a new clone who works another 3-year shift. I was a little bit surprised that happens it's kind of at the end of the first act, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just very early. And that's a good way of going. It's a good way of going about it. It's not a big twist, or it is a big twist, but it's not the ending twist. It's just, that's going to be the story of the movie now. You thought it was a film about a astronaut miner on the moon. It's actually the kind of sci-fi thing that we're dealing with more is cloning and,
Yes,
what
it's got that
means.
whole other layer to it. But then it still is a film about an astronauts on the moon.
Yeah.
But it does it in a very clever way because it shows you the effect of it from the start and how 3 years on the moon will change you.
Yeah.
So basically what happens is the Sam who's just about to finish his shift, 3-year shift, gets in one of the harvesters, or is trying to fix a harvester, and there's an accident. And we don't know what's happened. And then another Sam wakes up, but we assume that it's our Sam who we've been following from the start.
Yeah, but if you're paying close attention on your first viewing, he's got a hand injury before he goes out on into the harvester. And when the second Sam wakes up, he touches Gertie, his companion robot, played by Kevin Spacey. He sort of strokes Gertie's face with the injured hand, and it's fine.
Yeah.
So that's your first. So rewatching it, because I was expecting it to be a bigger twist later in the film, I was like, his hand's not got the injury. Like I thought I was really clever for working out that it was a clone, but we're going to find out in like 5 minutes time.
Yeah, but I suppose you can sort of like, if you're watching it on first viewing, you can write that off as he's in like the infirmary. We don't know how long he's been in the infirmary.
Yeah.
He could have healed his hand in that
Yeah.
time. But yeah, it's a very important thing that they've made that differentiation between the two.
Yeah.
But as it goes on, you kind of like, they don't explicitly say, but you find out pretty soon that this Sam has just started his 3-year shift.
Yeah.
And you can tell that from some of the video messages. Because there's a video message that he doesn't mention the daughter at all in one of the first ones that this Sam gets.
Who doesn't?
So in the last video we saw,
Oh, right.
the Sam who's on his end of his shift, it's saying like, we can't wait to see you, blah, blah, blah.
And we see the little girl.
Yeah, and then this new one, it says, I think this is good for you being out there, blah, blah, blah. It's good for us. We need this time away. So it's a different video message because it's gone back to the start.
Right. But this Sam also sees stuff he's not supposed to see at the start of the shift rotation. He sees Gertie talking in real time to who is it? Is like Benedict Wong and Matt Berry.
Berry, yeah.
Ridiculous.
I could not
cast.
believe it when Matt Berry's name flashed up on the beginning. I was like, Matt Berry.
Yeah. But you hear him immediately.
Yeah,
you
you
can
know.
hardly see him.
Yeah.
You
I
never
think
get a good shot of their faces.
That's deliberate, though,
Yeah.
isn't it? They've got and I think if I saw Matt Berry there, I'd probably just want to laugh a bit.
Well, I don't know. I think Matt Berry's voice is as much Matt Berry as Matt Berry's face.
I think I've
you
just
know?
watched too much of Toast and things like
Yeah.
that. So in that, you just hear his voice all the time.
Yeah.
And I half expected someone to shout out, "It's me, Clem Fandango."
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to hear that.
Yes, I can hear you. And Benedict Wong as well.
Yeah.
I guess he wasn't as much of a big deal. This is 10 years ago. He's quite famous now.
Yeah,
isn't
probably
he?
not back then.
He's
But
a Marvel guy now,
They're
right?
both friends of Duncan Jones.
Okay.
So Duncan Jones sort of got them in as
Yeah.
favours.
Yeah. This is his first film, isn't it, Duncan Jones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was on a micro budget, wasn't it? Well, I say micro budget, 5 million.
Yeah.
But then to come up with what the finished article they've got for
Yeah.
5 million, this is really something.
Yeah. But he sounds like he's pulling in a lot of favours.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you'd have to.
Got a slight leg up in the world when he dad's David Bowie, maybe. Maybe. I don't know. I couldn't possibly
It
say.
might help out.
I don't know why I said that. I think Duncan Jones seems like a really lovely bloke when I've
Yeah.
seen him in interviews, and I wish him all the best.
And it was filmed in Shepperton Studios as well.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, right. I think I've been there.
Probably. If you've I know I've been there for work before.
Yeah.
And they got so I like the model work as well is really cool because
Yeah, it's good.
all of the space shuttles and things like that, they were actually miniature models, but then they were composited with CGI to give them
that's
that extra edge.
You can see the miniatureness sometimes when they're in
Yeah.
the rovers.
There's
But they're
bits
very
where
nice
it comes in, but
models.
I love that sort of effect.
Yeah, it looks cool.
And they got the guy who did the Nostromo designs.
Really?
Yeah, Bill Pearson.
Right.
So he's the guy who helped out with a lot of the designs for the space shuttle and stuff and making it look as realistic as possible or sort of like in that world.
That's cool. It reminded me a lot of 2001, the moon base, especially when they're kind of like pulling out of they've got a big sort of hangar door where the rovers are parked up.
Yeah.
That really looked like the moon base in 2001, you know, where they leave the moon base and go to the monolith. The models were very similar there. It really reminded me of that.
Yeah, it's got lots of that kind of stuff in there. And it's sort of, again, it's like Silent Running, and you can tell Duncan Jones has taken influence from those kind of films.
Yeah.
Because-
Well, Gertie's very HAL-like, isn't it?
Yeah, Gertie is very, it's like an anti-Hal again.
Yeah.
Kind of like what they wanted to do with Silent Running, because when we talked about that, they made that as sort of the anti-2001
Okay.
initially. You look at Gertie and you instantly think there's something going on here. He's like, Gertie's a bit underhanded. Something's not right.
Something's not right. And sometimes so he expresses himself with emojis basically on
Yeah.
screen.
And this must have been before emojis had really taken off, because it's 2009.
Yeah, but we'd had, before emojis, there was, emoticons.
Yeah, so it's like-
MSN
yeah.
Messenger had.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
But I feel like I hadn't really used them at this point.
yeah, it does feel a bit suspicious with Gertie, and there's moments where it feels very obvious that Gertie is lying to Sam, or certainly like Sam asks him point blank a question and he does his little like confused
Yeah.
emoticon and then doesn't answer the question and then says something else. So yeah, there's a bit of that menace there, isn't there? It's interesting that you think of him as an anti-Hal. So, I'm very sympathetic to Hal
Yeah.
these days. I think he's very similar to Hal. I think Hal treated Dave in a similar way to the way Gertie treats Sam. But my kind of view on Hal these days is that Hal was also working with this immense threat of not wanting to go to Jupiter. So I think if you took away the threat of Jupiter from Hal, you'd have Gertie.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. I can see where you're going with that as well.
I think that Hal's made a calculation that we cannot go to Jupiter. It is very bad. We must not go to Jupiter. And he does everything in his power to stop that. Gertie has no threat. Gertie wants to keep recycling this pattern of cloning, looking after the clones, hanging out with the clones, incinerating them after 3 years,
Yeah.
and then hanging out with a new one.
And he's always looking after them, isn't he?
Yeah.
And that's his main objective.
Yeah.
He wants to look after these clones. He's always asking if they want food. Do you want food? Do you want dinner? Blah, blah. I'll make you something now. You haven't eaten for a while.
Yeah. And he does go a bit haywire, but he goes haywire in a way that is helpful to the Sams.
Yeah.
So we're getting ahead a bit, aren't we? So everything goes wrong because the first Sam we see died, right? And none of the clones are supposed to die. They're supposed to reach the end of their 3 years. They all kind of break down. I really like that element of it. Like they just get, his hair's falling out.
They've got a built-in lifespan, kind of like the replicants in Blade Runner.
Yeah. It is, exactly like that. But a much more, it's a bit grislier because the first Sam in this film, as the film goes on, he's like coughing up blood and his teeth are falling out. It gets really like grim.
And they get into like a little scuffle and then he says, "You're bleeding too much.
You're bleeding
for
loads."
this."
Yeah. So that's the primary issue, is that this Sam has been woken up earlier than planned. We shouldn't have had one die. Matt Berry and Benedict Wong are really mad at Gertie for allowing this situation to happen. And all of that plants like a little seed of doubt in the new Sam, who rigs things up to create a situation where he can go out and explore. Because Gertie's not letting him off the base. Gertie's not letting him do anything. Things aren't adding up. And he gets out and he finds Sam. He finds the original, the previous Sam.
And then once he gets him back, you've got this great dynamic between the two of them for the rest of the film, as they're sort of like getting to know each other a bit.
Getting to know yourself.
Yeah. And sort of really looking at each other and sort of trying to figure out this weird situation that they're in. Because the fact that one's just started the 3-year shift, one's just about to finish, you see the impact living alone in that isolated space in space has on someone. So there's a bit when the old Sam is like dealing with the plants, he's pruning them and stuff, and then he says, "Can I hold your hand? I just want to like shake your hand."
Yeah.
Because he hasn't had any sort of human contact for 3 years.
Yeah.
And that is so important for him at that point. But then the other Sam's kind of like dismissive of it.
Yeah.
He's just got up there. He's sort of he hasn't had this experience yet. So he's kind of like he doesn't care about this other Sam.
Yeah. It's all about that kind of, there's a lot about like learning to deal with yourself, which is why the moon or deep space or whatever is such a perfect setting for that. And that would have been the story, or it could have been the story, whether we did clones or not. He is all alone and he's struggling with that, and he's got to deal with being alone with himself. And on top of that, he's also got some marital issues that are hinted at early on and we go into a bit later. So that kind of learning to deal with yourself is magnified emotionally. And like you said, they're kind of, the plot from that point on in the film is that they're going to be trying to figure out what's going on with the cloning. But what I found really interesting was that's so delayed. So the big twist that he's a clone comes in surprisingly early, and then the rest of the film is ostensibly about figuring out the kind of what's going on with the clones. But because he just keeps arguing with himself and he gets into fights with himself, he gets angry at himself, literally.
Yeah.
They can't figure it out because the plot can't move on, because they can't work together, because he can't get along with himself.
Because they're at different stages in their life, aren't they? So the new Sam has just had these marital problems start. He doesn't know he's going to be a father at this point, I don't think.
Is that, do you reckon?
I think they say something like that.
Okay.
Because when he finds out, because the other Sam says, "Oh, you have a little girl."
Right.
But the main thing is like he's angry because of where he is in his marriage and that kind of thing. Whereas the other one has dealt with his anger issues because he's been there for so long. He's gotten over that. He's a lot calmer. He is just trying to sort of like get on with things so he can get home.
He's calmer and he doesn't snap like the new Sam does.
Yeah.
But he's still a bit of a grumpy bastard. That's his problem now. He's like withdrawn into himself and he's less likely to start a fight. They have a fight and he's literally holding a scalpel and he's making a point of saying, I'm a lover, not a warrior.
Yeah.
Like jokingly, but he really does have a look on his face that says, of course I'm not going to stab you. Like, that's ridiculous. And then the new Sam is the one that's too brash and actually wrestles the knife off him. But he is still, he's a grumpy old sod because he's more interested in sitting around carving his little structures than figuring out why there's a clone of him on board.
Yeah.
They both accept very quickly that one or the other of them at least is a clone. And they're acknowledging how incredibly weird that is. But the old one doesn't want to deal with it. He's just like, well, yeah, but my shift's over, so it's kind of your problem that one of us is a clone. You can sit on the moon for 3 years and think about that. I just want to go home. And it's so unhelpful. It's so frustrating for the other Sam.
I want to look underneath that model. You're not touching this model. Get out of the way. Listen, why don't you relax, okay? Why don't you take a pill, bake a cake, go read the encyclopedia. You're a tough guy now? What, are you gonna stab me? No, I'm a peaceful warrior. I'm a lover, I'm not a fighter. Put the knife down. Hey, I want to look underneath there. Put the knife down. No, I'm not gonna give you the knife. What? Just get out of the way. Take it easy, because I go with the knife. Don't ever tell me what to do, okay? Ow.
It's also like this idea of sort of determinism. So the idea that whatever you're going to do it anyway. But then if you've got a clone of yourself who's doing the same things every time, but it seems like these clones are all slightly different and they all do something not exactly the way it was before.
How so?
Well,
When do we
so
see
it's
that?
like you've got all these, so you see videos of the other Sams, and they all look slightly different at different points. They're all going through the same thing,
Yeah.
but there could always be something that changes them a little bit. So even though these clones are all supposed to do exactly the same thing, go on the same life cycle, for some reason, something's intervened to make it so that they're both there at the same time.
So it's not an exact replica of events every 3 years.
Exactly. Although it could be, and it should be, in terms of the way that they've got this experiment working.
Well, that's what the company would want.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they're expecting from it. But it all goes awry, doesn't it? So what do you think that the second Sam that we see in the film maybe is just by chance happens to be a slightly more inquisitive Sam, hence he gets out of bed a little bit earlier than he should because he hears voices?
Yeah, it could be something like that.
Yeah.
And then like you don't know how he's going to be at the end of this, given what he's gone through now.
Yeah.
Meeting this other Sam.
And also I think the first Sam's having some visions, right? So he should have never had that accident and died. That throws a massive spanner in the works of the cloning program. But he's having visions of a young woman with dark hair. It's not his wife.
Yeah.
I think it's his daughter
It's
at
his
15,
daughter, yeah.
right? So why is he seeing that, Because
So-
is that sort of a bit of a memory from the last clone? It can't be that, right?
Is that kind of what were your interpretations of it?
Well, I didn't realise that it was his daughter until he has, later in the film, he goes off grid, he takes a phone with him and he does place a call home and he sees his daughter age 15.
yeah.
And that's when I kind of put it together that he had a vision of that girl when he burnt his hand. Then he had a vision of her when he was out in the rover when he had the accident. But I wasn't sure. I never really put it together in my head how he was seeing that. Like, he wouldn't be imagining what his daughter might look like in 15 years or whatever.
And there's the bit where when he's in bed and then he sees somebody coming for him and it's him.
That's the newer
The
Sam.
new
has
Sam.
that.
So he
Yeah.
has that vision.
Yeah.
So they're both having visions.
They're both having visions that they should have no real access to.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not
So-
memory.
So Duncan Jones actually explained this bit.
Oh, go on.
So what he says so there's that thing with twins. People say that twins can sense how the other one's feeling and they
Okay.
can sense certain things.
Yeah.
So Duncan's sort of like putting forward the idea that, okay, if it's a clone, it's even more identical than a twin. And that's why these other twins feel like they have a connection to what's going on with their other selves.
And also
the
Sam
original
Bell on Earth, who
Yeah.
has a relationship with his 15-year-old daughter.
So he's having, as he's sort of coming towards the end of his lifespan, he's having visions of the other Sam Bell and his daughter. So that's happening. And then the same thing with the new Sam, he's having visions of the old Sam as he's sort of like struggling for life.
Okay, I'll go along with that. It's a classic I know who killed me situation.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Cool, that's fine. I accept that.
I like
works,
that
yeah.
as an idea, though. The idea that sort of the sort of psychic connection could be stronger between clones.
It is a good sci-fi
Well
concept.
done.
It's a good it's a good sci-fi film all round, isn't it? It is genuinely, it's a modern classic. It's everything falls into place. The concept is the setting is great. we've got a guy completely alone, miserable, mining on the moon in the future. The introduction of a cloning element to that fits perfectly with the themes and is also a nice sci-fi concept that gels into that sci-fi world. And then what glues it all together is Sam Rockwell is such a good actor.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, by far his best role.
It's just a stellar performance, isn't it? And
Yeah.
he was doing stuff like, because obviously he's acting with himself for the entire film.
Yeah.
He knew everything about these characters, sort of what each of them was feeling, what they were doing. And he would give himself little signposts when he was acting. So there might be a cough in a certain scene so that he knows that the other Sam, because he's just doing it via audio, isn't he?
Right.
So he knows that the other Sam in that scene is doing like a certain hand gesture or something like that.
As in, you mean he's
got a vocal,
remembering his own performance
he's
that
got
he did when he was
an audio
little.
cue
Right.
that he's built into each performance.
Oh, brilliant.
So that he can figure out exactly what this other Sam's doing when he's acting.
God, that's good.
Yeah.
Is it all green screen, or would he be acting with like a body double that they CGI'd? It's not a CGI'd face.
I'm not sure
That
how
would
they
be
did
noticeable.
it. But the actual moon base itself, they created the whole thing in Shepperton Studios with like the top and everything. So they built the entire set, and that's where they do all the filming, obviously. But it was all pre-lit, and then they had to think of ways to shoot around the different rooms because they'd made it so realistic. It was kind of finding ways that they can sort of like cheat this angle and having to cut stuff out the ceiling.
Sure, yeah.
And again, that must have come into play when they're trying to work out how to split off the different scenes so they can put in the new Sam.
Yeah, yeah. It's all just very smoothly done.
Yeah. So what did you think of the moment when he finds out that there's loads of Sams and how they approach that?
I think that it wasn't. It was done very smoothly. Again, it was quite a gentle moment. It could have been like a jaw-droppingly horrible moment, but I think that we've already kind of seen Sam go through that. By the time we get to that point in the film, I think both characters have accepted that they are both clones at that point, and the logical, conclusion is there's more. Neither of them are expecting there to be as many as they are. They get down and they're like, oh, Jesus, there's so many of them. But they're not like horrified, I don't think, by the number, because they've already gone through, I think, quite a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
This is after the older ones been out and made the phone call, and then the newer ones seen the recording of the phone call. And that, I think that is the real moment of trauma for both of them, is realizing and seeing their daughter is actually 15 years old. And,
Yeah, all these implanted memories aren't really their memories.
Yeah.
And they're just living life on a replay, basically.
Yeah. I think that is a more powerful moment for both of those characters than the actual finding the room. Finding the room is the thing that the youngest Sam is talking about through the whole film. It's like, we've got to find there, there must be a room full of clones. We've got to find it. And then when they get there, it's just like, oh, yep, as we suspected, there's a room full of clones.
But I also like the idea that when he goes to get the video so he can do the live call, I thought it was going to be like C4 or something, and he was going to blow up the other clones.
Oh, right.
That's what I thought, but then he wouldn't have any other reason to kill the other clones because he's a clone himself. And that's kind of the actions of an original, potentially, who's scared of that idea.
Or, I mean, I can see why they might have gone down that route, just to be horrified to find out what your life is in that situation, and just want to kind of throw a stick in the spokes of the wheel and stop it. I could understand if that was the way they wanted to go. But what's interesting, I guess, is that he literally confronts himself, on a sort of thematic level, and it happens literally on screen. And both versions of himself have personal growth off the back of that. So they spend a big chunk of the film arguing and fighting, and then they have a physical fight, and they both go off. And the older one talks about, oh God, I really am an asshole. My wife is right. I'm such a dick. And also the younger one comes back from that, and he's apologetic. They have this like personal growth through really like being able to look at yourself and see what you're like.
Yeah.
And then I think that's why we don't go down the route of wanting to destroy the whole thing. It's like, well, we can move on from this. We can do something constructive. I've got a plan. let's get out of here. Let's try and go home. And the younger one is quite noble there because he's offering the older one the opportunity to go back to Earth. He's got a plan to send him home.
He's got a problem. He scares me, Gertie.
What is it about Sam that scares you?
He flies off the handle. I see it now. I see what Tess was talking about. I never told you this, Gertie, but she left me. Tess left me. For 6 months, she moved back in with her parents.
I know.
So you've got the rich businessmen who want to get the gold from the moon in Frau and Mond, and they want to do that as quickly and as economically as possible. In Moon, you've got the rich businessman back home, this Lunar Industries, and the whole reason there are clones is to cut corners and keep things cheap.
Yeah.
So they don't have to pay for constantly training people up and then getting them up to the moon all the time. They can have this room full of clones who are all pre-trained. They're like experts in their field of mining, and they can just wake them up whenever they need and get the next one. And then it's cheaper for them to do that than to have new astronauts coming up every 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's quite a terrifying...
It's fundamentally cruel, isn't it?
Yeah. But again, it speaks to this idea of the sort of evil corporation that's behind all of this and like pulling the strings from the background.
Yeah.
And to have a film in 1929 do it and then have this 80 years later doing the same thing still, but it's finding new ways to sort of bring that idea across is it's really cool.
Yeah. That evil corporation kind of becomes the main threat at the end, isn't it? It's the two Sams. So there's a rescue, quote unquote, rescue mission coming. But the two Sams are under no illusions that like when that gets here, they're just going to kill both of us because we know what's going on with the cloning and they can't have that.
And then they decide to make another clone.
Yeah.
So they get another clone in the mix, who we never meet. But the fact they're still they've got to do this in order to get the new Sam back to Earth.
Yeah. And that's kind of justified because we do hear some like audio clips at the end that implies that the most recent Sam kind of reveals what's going on and kind of tanks the company and it becomes a whole scandal back home, right?
Yeah. And I think Duncan Jones had the idea to do some sort of sequel film in the same sort of universe.
He did.
But I don't think... Did he do it?
Yeah, it's Mute. It's on Netflix.
Mute. Is that actually set in this universe?
Yeah, it's a bit... I haven't seen it, but I think it's a bit Cloverfield-y.
Because I did see I didn't realise that was what it was because I saw him talking about potentially doing something else.
I think Sam Rockwell's got a cameo in Mute, but it's not about Sam Bell.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a bit like Cloverfield sort of thing, and I think Duncan Jones wants to do more in a similar like loosely connected universe way. Yeah.
And the Sam Rockwell thing. So he wrote this part specifically because he wanted his first movie to have Sam Rockwell in.
Really?
So he'd already written another film, and Sam Rockwell wanted to play one part, and then Duncan Jones wanted Sam to play a different part, and they couldn't agree, and they kept sort of back and forthing, and neither of them come to agreement. So basically, what Duncan Jones did was like, right, I'm going to go back, and Sam had mentioned to him that he loved sci-fi films. He said, if you ever get a good sci-fi script, give me a shout. So Duncan Jones goes back, writes this film specifically for him.
Oh, cool.
And then gives him the script, and then that's how it all kicked off.
That's great. That comes through because it's a classic example of like director and actor working together on a very small scale to make a really great film.
Definitely. And like you think about all of the projects that Sam could have done, could have picked, but he obviously, and he gives a lot of himself to this performance.
I don't know if this really fits in, but there was one bit with Gertie that I really loved. For quite a long time, no one's asking Gertie what's going on, or if they do, he just like sort of ignores the issue.
Yeah.
And then the newer Sam like really bluntly, directly says to Gertie, I think he just says, "Am I a clone, Gertie?" And Gertie switches to a sad face, and he goes, do you remember when you first got here, there was an accident? He goes, yeah. And he's like, there was no accident. It's standard procedure for clones that we start them off with like a clean slate, and then they're implanted with some memories and all of that. And he just kind of like lays it all out for him. And then Sam turns away, and Gertie's face changes from a sad face to like a crying one.
Yeah.
And it's the only time he does that in the whole film. And he tries to like touch Sam on the back, like pat him on the back.
Yeah, with his little robot hands.
I think that's the bit in the film where if you were unsure about Gertie, that's where you would sort of change. You'd be like, okay, Gertie wants the best for Sam.
Yeah.
And that is how it plays out at the end of the film, isn't it?
Am I really a clone?
When you first arrived at Serang, there was a small crash. You woke up in the infirmary. You suffered minor brain damage and memory loss. I kept you under observation and ran some tests.
I remember that.
Sam, there was no crash. You were being awakened. It is standard procedure for all new clones to be given tests to establish mental stability and general physical health. Genetic abnormalities and minor duplication errors in the DNA can have considerable impact on...
What about Tess? What about Eve?
They are memory implants, Sam. Uploaded, edited memories of the original Sam Bell.
Gertie even sacrifices himself, doesn't he? Because he says, "Oh, you could, if like they'll find you, they can look in my memory banks. Just wipe my mind."
Yeah, you can wipe my memory. But it's not even that tragic, because for him it's like, wipe my memory and me and the new Sam will just go back to our, he calls it, go back to our programming.
Yeah.
Which Sam's like, don't call it, we're not programs, we're people. Which sort of goes to your thing about determinism, doesn't it? Like that clone of Sam does not believe in determinism. Or does believe in determinism? Which way around is it? But he believes...
He doesn't believe that...
No fate but what we make, right?
Exactly.
So he agrees to it. And that's, Gertie's happy with that. I did find it interesting that Gertie doesn't respond to that. He says, we're not programmed, Gertie, we're people. And Gertie is just silent. So I wondered what Gertie thought about that. Like, is he thinking he can't comprehend that and he's happy to just go back to the programming and that's the life he wants with the clones? Or is he thinking, you are programmed, but I'm not going to hurt your feelings by telling you that you're programmed?
Who knows? It's like, it's a tricky thing to try and contemplate.
Yeah, and I like the fact that Gertie's just silent in that moment, and we're not told what Gertie's response would be. He just doesn't have one.
Yeah.
He's like Teddy.
Yeah. Like
From
Teddy.
AI.
Kind of like a more verbal Huey, Dewey and Louie.
Yep. He's Huey, Dewey, Louie, Teddy, Hal.
Have you seen Final Space on Netflix?
Yeah, I'm not sure about it.
It's like it's a less annoying version of the robot in there who's meant to keep him sane.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very much like that. Yeah,
so it's got those kind of aspects. And that idea of there needs to be, if you're out there in space and you're sort of stranded, you're doing some sort of job, you're away from everyone, you're away from there's no human contact, you need to have something in order to keep you from going mad. Yeah,
but so often in films and TV that use that trope, the thing that's there to keep you sane doesn't do a terribly good job of it.
Yeah.
Huey, Dewey and Louie ultimately don't keep him holding it together. Final Space, the guy's completely off it and he hates his companion. And also at the start of Moon, it's quite tense with Gertie, right? Because he's at the end of his 3-year shift and he's actually a bit snippy with Gertie. He doesn't want to talk to Gertie and he kind of pushes him away a couple of times at the start of the movie because he's really focused on, I don't have to be here anymore. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going home. So whatever relationship he's got with Gertie, it's like, well, thank you for keeping me sane, but I actually want to go back to my family now. It's, I've got a better offer. Those robots don't work keeping people sane in space.
Yeah, I think both of these films we looked at today they're both talking about how, they're both sort of putting forward this idea of being out in space will bring your own feelings to the forefront. And then it's kind of like, how do you deal with those? In Frau and Mond, it was the love triangle.
Yeah.
And when they're on the moon, you find out that Hans has lost it a little bit. He can't quite handle the pressure. So his true side comes out. Turner's true side comes out. He's trying to like get away. Professor Manfelt turns out that he really just wants the gold and he wants to sort of like be this big scientist. And that all comes to the forefront. And then obviously the Helios and Frida relationship all sort of like surfaces.
Yeah, and I guess what they're saying there is also just Helios on his own is a genuinely good guy because he kind of sticks to his stoicism and he's quite brave, and that all holds together even under the stress of going to the moon.
Yeah, because you need to have that kind of resolve to do this kind of this travel, this like traveling into space. And with Moon, you've got Sam Bell, whose character has to have that resolve for those 3 years in order to make it through that amount of time, working out there and sort of doing his job in the hopes that he can get back. So there's a need there. He wants to be back home. And they say something like the 3 years is a deliberate thing because that's the maximum amount of time you could have someone working to their utmost, because they know that they've only got a finite amount of time, so they're not going to like lose interest, and they know they're going to get back. So there's something about that as well in that film.
Yeah, he's pushed his absolute limits on his own. What's our theme for next week then, James?
So next week, we'll be looking at what space travel looks like. So we're going to take another trip to the moon. Can you believe it?
2 more trips to the moon. 2
more trips to the moon for us. So we're going to have a look at a film from the 1950s. It's called Destination Moon. It was directed by Irving Pichel and Dick Lundy, I believe. So we're going to have a little look at that. I'm very excited to look through that one because apparently it's one of the films which launched this big sci-fi movement in the 50s.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a look at that. And what's the other one we're looking at, Matt?
And then we're going to do the smash hit from my childhood, Ron Howard's Apollo 13 from 95, which I haven't seen since it came out. I mean, that was like easily the biggest film of that year, right?
Yeah, it was massive, wasn't it? And although it's not strictly science fiction, it's more of a sort of it's like historical drama, would you say, almost?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's got those elements of science fiction in there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of we want to sort of look at the realism of space travel and how, so whenever you watch a sci-fi film now, there's certain things you've got in your head and you expect to see when you see somebody traveling to space. And I think both these films lays some of the foundation for that.
Yeah. And also how those practicalities of space travel kind of inspire filmmakers and capture imaginations with audiences as well.
Yeah, so which bits do we get right in this sort of speculative fiction, and which bits do we get wrong, and what do we expect from astronauts? All that kind of stuff we'll be covering in the next episode. So that's it for today's episode. We'll be back next time. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on all the social media sites. Matt, do you want to give people a list of some of those places they can find us?
You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Bebo. I've done this joke before.
I can't do the Bebo one.
You can drop us a line on email, journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com.
Yep.
We're Through Sci-Fi Pod on Twitter and Instagram.
Yes, we are.
And just type the words into Facebook. They've all got their own search engines, so you'll be fine.
You'll be able to find us.
You know the name of the show.
Exactly.
Type it into the little bar that says search before you type anything into it. So send us an email, drop us a review. That would be really appreciated as well. And get in touch, say hello.
Definitely. Okay, well, thank you all very much, and we'll see you again next time.